Welcome to Verto Voices, an ongoing series where we profile Verto's innovative digital health leaders. If you've ever wanted to learn more about important issues in health tech, AI, health policy, and more, this is the place for you. Today, we're joined by Martin Persaud, Verto's Director of AI and Technology Transformation. Martin holds a master's in management of artificial intelligence and has deep real-world experience with healthcare data, interoperability specifications, and development of AI solutions to core problems in this domain. Join us as we chat about the mystical world of artificial intelligence and adjacent technologies, the recent hype around it, how we can apply it in healthcare, and potential pitfalls companies might face when incorporating AI into their solutions. Without further ado, let's get into it. Martin, thank you very much for joining us. We're really excited to have you here today. Before we jump into the wild world of AI, I'd like to find out a little bit more about yourself, kind of what led you here to where you're working at Verto. I know you come from a financial background in both your educational and professional pasts. What was your path to getting into healthcare and specifically health tech?
Yeah, so I think I had a very different way into the space. Although a lot of people that you meet, they do have a weird path into AI. It's not just your typical engineers. There are a lot of those, but there are a lot of other people that sort of found their place here. So for me, I did a commerce degree. I got my CA/CPA, completed my CFA exams, followed the traditional path of wanting to be an auditor at Deloitte. And within a very short span of time, I found a lot of the audit work kind of monotonous. Wanted to find new ways to automate it. I thought there were a lot of cool statistical ways to show that something was valid versus just brute force testing. And that was like my very first experience with automation and applying slightly higher math than counting to achieve the same goal. And so from there, I ended up getting very interested in finance as opposed to just very basic audit and accounting. And I actually was able to do due diligence for venture capital and government funding for, I would say, maybe 30 to 40 either tech companies or tech projects that were undertaken by these companies. And from there, I really just thought, I need to get into this space. I got to see how transformative it could be, and I was tired writing about it. So I actually got seconded to Deloitte's consulting team, where they researched specifically how AI would impact the world. And this was in, I think, 2017. That gave me a good 6 months to really focus on that space, where I realized AI could have a big impact in many facets of the world, but healthcare stood to really benefit if it were applied correctly. Obviously, at the time, I didn't know that much about healthcare, but I thought I needed to get further into the space. And that meant going to industry. And so I took my first leap into sales at a health tech scale-up in Toronto. And every step I took, I just wanted to get deeper and deeper, and definitely ran across some people that said, you weren't traditionally trained in this space. So it took a while to credential, including a master's that was based in AI after that. But I feel like I'm now starting to get into it a little bit more and growing the competencies that I need to.
So the term AI itself is pretty broad and encompassing. If you were to break it down for individuals like myself who don't have a ton of background in artificial intelligence, how would you put kind of a layman's slant on it and kind of break it down in a way that we could all understand the different components that make up AI?
So AI is not a neat term, and you're always hearing it kind of synonymous with machine learning, deep learning, et cetera, et cetera. It's actually quite confusing for most people to understand what it actually is, other than that it's doing things that maybe humans cannot do as accurately in very specific cases. Only as of recent, that's being more generalized with these large language models. Again, another buzzword. So my version of this, which corroborates with what's online for the most part, is AI is like the wide umbrella term. And then within that, you have the reason-based expert systems, you have knowledge graphs, and then there's the actual learning domain of AI, machine learning. That's what's getting all the press right now, probably for good reason. And so machine learning is, in my view, just a subset of AI. And then within machine learning, now you've got all of these other key terms that are being used. So in a traditional sense, machine learning can be, or has been, delineated between supervised learning, unsupervised learning, and reinforcement learning. I don't need to go into details on what all of those are, but it's really just different ways of training an algorithm depending on the type of data that you have and the task that you're trying to complete. And then within supervised learning, you're seeing a lot of these newer algorithms within this deep learning space where language learning models and all of these bigger models that are making mainstream right now typically fit. Again, it's not a neat fit. This is just trying to make it understandable. I would say in practice, even when we're trying to do some of our work at Verto, I can't classify anything as purely supervised or deep learning per se. It's all kind of layered on top of each other depending on what the need is. So that's the best way to understand how all these terms fit together without really boxing anything in.
So if we were to stick on machine learning and ML ops as a really kind of an emerging part of that, like how can it be applied within the healthcare sector?
ML ops is this new space. It's the intersection between DevOps and machine learning. And I think there's like a really good analogy for it because we're living this right now as we try to build our algorithms and deploy them at scale and then make sure that they work over time because, data changes over time. But if you think about the amount of effort it took for like Google and Microsoft to build version control for documents, that is a blank piece of paper where you can write your ideas, and yet there's these massive companies still trying to solve versioning control. Well, imagine now we're building a machine learning model and I need to determine which data I use to train it, the features that I want to save, the embeddings that I want to use, the version of the model that's going to be deployed, and then I need to monitor that that model actually works in all the different domains that I apply it to. That sounds a lot more complicated than simply writing on paper, albeit digital, right? So imagine the amount of thought that needs to go into the operations of machine learning and versioning. And so where this applies in healthcare is healthcare data is extremely complex. It's a very large domain with subdomains. It has a lot of different formats. And the tasks, I would say, were quite far away from a general AI. So you're doing a lot of task-based things. Those tasks can be enhanced, the performance, thereby that the machine learning algorithm performs those tasks, could be changed by the type of data that you train. It could be, changed by the population that it's being applied to. And so MLOps and the governance that comes with it, if done correctly, will help a lot of these healthcare companies apply this type of algorithm in the right way, monitor it, make sure that it's applicable to the population and the task. It's really going to be a key factor in our success, generally speaking, in healthcare. Unless there's some all-knowing AGI down the road. But yeah, for now, I think, and even then, you'll need this.
And you've spoken about the importance of really not focusing so heavy on the flashy aspects of AI. Like generative AI is really a buzzword right now. In your mind, how would you like to see AI really focused? What area could it really be of significant use?
Yeah, so I fully understand the sort of hype around LLMs and generative AI. I think it has its place. I'm certainly not a detractor of this new technology. I would actually love to see it make an impact earlier. But in healthcare right now, we're in a space where moving on from facts is a revolution. And, we need to be able to bridge, and this is not new. None of that is novel. I want to be clear that I'm not saying anything groundbreaking in saying that, facts is the norm and it's a big leap to AI. But at the same time, you can't expect these healthcare providers who have been so used to applying their knowledge a certain way to all of a sudden trust a completely automated way of making choices. And that's just one aspect of where it can be deployed, but it's the one that most consumers and the general populace understands, right? And helping people make choices. There's a lot of other sort of behind the scenes applications that could work, But there's going to be a lot that happens before we get to a point where it's decision-making at the patient level, at the point of care. And so I think the things that artificial intelligence can do right now is actually focus on, interoperability is a massive problem in healthcare. It's actually one of the reasons why we struggle to get data to train our algorithms, because there's so much that has to be done to get this data, to transform it into something we can use. And so standards have its place in the health data world to standardize how that data looks, but it's not enough. There's so many legacy vendors out there that I fully understand their position. They don't want to go and change systems they deployed 20 years ago, disrupting day-to-day healthcare operations. And so we need to think of another way to transform data at the source and make it usable for things like analytics, decision-making, whatever the case may be. And I think AI has its place there right now. AI can be that thing that makes that process a little less manual. It hasn't been solved yet. Schema matching and tasks of that nature are still not as well researched as other aspects of AI. So it is a problem that we need to address, not just in healthcare, but it will be one that makes a huge impact on healthcare.
Would you be able to speak a little bit to what are we doing at Verto to improve the clinician experience and patient outcomes?
Yeah, so first I'll talk about it at the technological level. We do have a couple patents that we've filed. One is specifically what I just spoke about, really honing in on the data ingestion, because it comes in all these different formats. And so I think deploying that at scale and being able to automate data mapping, schema matching at scale is going to be a huge factor in the interoperability space, which is one of the most quoted barriers to better healthcare across all health systems. The second is actually another patent, which everyone wants to solve the problem by being the house of master data. And so you end up with a bunch of master data systems that have copies of this data. You don't know where it was originated. Therefore, the end users may not be able to trust it. It's obviously inefficient. It creates silos, et cetera. So our second patent is very focused on virtualizing data so that we can point back to where it came from and we can maintain a lot of the provenance around it so choices can be made on it. And so I think Verto is doing both of those things during the data ingestion process so that when we make this data available to end users, whether those are administrative, policy makers and decision makers, or it's in the clinical domain, we're equipping them with the right information to make choices. And in the future, if anything is predictive, we're able to point back to why those predictions were made. We're putting interpretation at the forefront right away instead of trying to prove that an algorithm in itself can perform, because healthcare is human and humans need to be able to interpret regardless of how accurate it is. So I would say, that's kind of how we're tackling this problem. There's a lot of other things we're doing with clients right now, like ingesting these healthcare source systems data and applying these patents to get it to a point where their policymakers can make choices. So we are doing this in real time, and I think it's going to make an impact.
Where do you see AI being applied within the healthcare space 10 years from now? Like within the next 10 years, what do you think we'll be looking back on?
Ideally, there is some form of generative AI. I'm not opposed to that. But I think what's going to happen is we need to be aware of the regulation coming down the pipeline and plan for it. It doesn't need to be necessarily a blocker to innovation if we're acknowledging that it's there for a reason. So I think in the next 10 years, people will wake up to that. We will start to see policies coming out. In fact, the Cures Act just a couple days ago released HTI-1, which calls for the transparency of any algorithms that drive decision-making. I think that's one of many that are going to come down the pipe. And instead of being reactive, we should be thinking, well, there's a reason this is happening. And the algorithms of the future will be able to address that. I think now, if we're getting a little more exciting about things outside of regulation and that becoming more mature, in the past 24 months, there's been so much attention on language, large language models, and how we're using language as a way to represent knowledge and apply knowledge. I don't have to get into the specifics on how that works, but that's really just an understanding of language patterns. And it's through billions of documents that have been ingested by these algorithms. We've also started to see, things like autonomous vehicles and all these other spaces where vision is being used. And so I can see a world in 10, maybe a little more than 10 years, where these modalities come together and start to really drive decision-making that's multimodal. So not just based on some progress note, but also based on the radiology report or the image itself. And that's happening already, but in isolation. Bringing these things together to tell the story of a patient is when things become really powerful. My hope is that we move in that direction. I'm sure people are already working on a multimodal approach, and you're starting to see architectures based on that. So there's like the mixture of experts architecture, where depending on the task, the type of data, what you're trying to convey, there's a mixture of experts that you would consult, experts being these algorithms. And so I think that's where we could go, but I want to stress right now, it is a long road to that, and our focus is making the best use of healthcare data, using AI to do so that we can forge that future.
Folks, we hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we enjoyed making it. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to watch this space for upcoming episodes. I've been your host, Eric Phillipson, signing off for this edition of Verto Voices. Take care.